Okay, let's get going. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Retuning Your Firm. It's the last episode of 2024, Friday the 29th of November. Looking outside today, it's not too bad. It's a bit of blue sky here, quite peaceful. I think it's going to get a bit warmer over the weekend. It's been quite cold for the last few days. So what I'd like to just say is today, I think we're looking at some really interesting and important themes, performance, and we actually have a sneak preview is the term that Ray has used for the survey that some of you may have completed recently, looking into performance management in professional firms. We will have our usual slot from John on politics and what are the key issues going on. Again, we had an overnight resignation of a minister, so somehow never stops, does it? And then we have leadership, which I think is very much Magnus, who has been 17 years, and Chris, who has had an equal period, more from the senior partner side. So that's a little bit about what we're doing today. So over to me, and delighted to be with you. So let's just run through who's on the show today. So bear with me. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Chris Seaton. Chris is the senior partner of a law firm called Burges, Salmon, and he is going to be my co-host for today. Welcome, John. Welcome, Chris. My second guest is our regular. Just replace the spotlight, and welcome to John Rowland, who is the senior partner of H Advisors Cicero, and he will be giving us his insightful political comment with. Whenever I look at the transcript, I get jealous because I couldn't speak without in that focused a way. But welcome and looking forward to hearing your thoughts for today.
Morning.
Over to you. Good morning, all. Right, and our next guest, and in fact, our presenter today is Ray de Cruz. Ray's has just flown in from Australia, but he says the jet lag's okay. But Ray runs a business called Performance Leader. Background a lawyer, moved into training, and now runs a software company. So brings those three elements together and has worked with Managing Partners Forum over, well, many years. And delighted to have worked with him recently on a new study into performance within professional service firms. And we're going to get a sneak preview, as I mentioned. So welcome, Ray. And our last, but by absolutely no means least, guest is Magnus Hallin. Magnus is the CEO of EIP, which for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is a patent attorney firm for about 200 strong in 4 or 5 countries. And he's been the CEO there for about 3.5 years, but he was then the CEO of a predecessor firm for about 12 years. So he has been in a sort of management slot for a number of years. So hopefully we will hear some interesting insights from leadership when we come to the panel session, which of course he will be a member of. Some of you will be aware, I've mentioned it to you, that there's an invitation-only growth summit taking place on the end of March, 4 months away, 27th, 28th in London. And it's a gala dinner, an award ceremony for the PBS Growth Awards, and also a C-suite conference. And many of you on this call today, and there's a good number I can see, will be getting an invitation shortly for that. What's the background? Well, professional services, as some of you may be aware, was designated as one of the 8 growth driving sectors in the government's industrial strategy. And what government intends to do is prioritize subsectors where there is evidence that policy can address barriers to growth. Now, the summit's based on the mid-market, really, which is, most people would define 100 to about 2,000 employees. So very much in the sweet spot of both Chris and Magnus today. And look at what are some of those key barriers to growth. Now, one of them is a lack of knowledge of how to grow a business. And that's a pretty key issue. And that's really the area we're going to focus on this summit. In other words, how can you grow a business? How can you help it? And usually the words that come out of that process are leadership, brand, and strategy, how to build a growth strategy. And the second area we're looking at is new ideas, because at times, I've seen this, new ideas don't always flourish in a fairly traditional context. So we're looking at new ways to bring ideas to professional services firms leaders through an organization called the Center for Professional Services Research. So let's move on. What do we talk about as well? The job board. The job board on the Skills Development Platform now has hundreds of HR vacancies, and we'll shortly be launching a salary comparison service for HR teams. and with finance and tech jobs to follow. So that's a really interesting for people who are looking at what's going on, not necessarily for a job for themselves, but around insight and intelligence as to what are the key areas that people are looking for people for. All 99 episodes, it's 99 today, quite scary, isn't it, of Retuning since 2020 will shortly be uploaded to a Retuning online community. And the great thing there is it's going to have AI summaries and prompt boxes for every single episode. And you'll get an invite to that shortly. And we're also going to be inviting you to register for Retuning 2025. Episode 100 is on the 31st of Jan. And for those who've been with us for a few years, it's going to be with Francesca, and that's really exciting. So I'm sorry if we got the view of me missing for some of that time, but Magnus was very patient. So I'll now, if I may, pass over to Chris, who's going to introduce our first presentation. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Richard. And for regular attendees of these webinars, John will need really no introduction. As Richard said, he's the UK lead and senior partner at Cicero, arguably the most, or maybe unarguably, the most influential of the political consultancies. John has over 17 years experience advising clients over a very wide range of sectors and operating from both London and Washington, so has very much an international perspective. Fun fact, John quotes being a barbecue chef as one of his key interests. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Chris. And actually, we had some American friends visiting us, and I had a turkey on the barbecue yesterday, so I'm glad I could just give some credence to that fun fact about me. So political update. I think this government could do with some help on its performance at the moment. So maybe, Ray, your presentation should be shared around government. I'm going to zoom in on the CBI conference, which happened on Monday, as a bit of a crystallization of the pickle that the government's got itself in. So CBI conference, it's tradition that the Chancellor shows up, sometimes the Prime Minister, and gives a speech and a Q&A. And last time round, Labour was, absolutely full of confidence. It was pre-election. The business community had had enough of the Tories, couldn't wait to see the back of them. And you could see, and in this happened with all of our clients, the business community's attention moved to Labour. And everybody thought, okay, right, we're going to put the Tory psychodrama behind us. Labour was saying the adults are back in, we're going to be back in charge. The adults will be back in charge. They were well received at Davos. And then the election happened, big majority, as I've said before on these, big majority, very thin public support for the size of majority they've got. But there's been this sort of sense that the wheels are falling off a little bit, actually, over the last few weeks. The budget, I think, shocked the business community because Rachel Reeves had managed expectations on taxes and said, right, I'm ruling out VAT rises, income tax rises, corporation tax. So there's a list of taxes that they weren't going to raise. So we thought, okay, well, like employer payroll taxes, they're not within that list of exclusions. But the fact that 25 billion quid's worth of tax rises were going on to payroll taxes has set the retail sector, the care sector, and the hospitality sector into an absolute fury with the government. And you could see it at the CBI conference. And the CBI is an organisation that's had a bit of a rough ride over the last few years for reasons that we all know about. But suddenly it's got a raison d'etre again, because there is this sense that Labour is actually slightly taken business for a ride. Now, there are certain parts of the business community that I deal with, the financial services sector, they're pretty happy. But anybody that's got large numbers of relatively low paid staff is getting a huge increase in their NICs, and they're getting minimum wage increases, and we've got labour market reform as well. So that's a long way of saying that the Labour's honeymoon with business is over. It was going to end at some point, but it's happened much more quickly perhaps than I thought it would. And you could see it in Rachel Reeves' sort of demeanour as well, that she looked a little bit slightly harassed actually at the conference. She looked a bit off center, and I think that's quite interesting. I don't think she was quite used to that level of questioning or pushback from business. But she said, "Look, okay, I've increased taxes, but I haven't heard, and everybody's complaining. I haven't heard any alternatives. I've got to get the money from somewhere. Nobody's coming with any alternatives." And then this second commitment comes, which is we will not put up taxes again on businesses in this parliament. So that's quite a big commitment to make, especially if bond yields stay up and maybe the NI increases don't raise as much tax as she was hoping because of dynamic effects, right? You put the taxes up, businesses change behavior, and the projections don't quite work out. So that's linked to what she's put herself into a bit of a box there. And if you've got a budget to deliver in 12 or 24 months' time, she's ruled out a whole load of taxes that she can't touch now. So the number of taxes she can actually increase are becoming narrower and narrower and narrower. And what Keir Starmer has said as well, we're trying to front load all these tax rises early in the Parliament, but I think they've made a bit of a error there. I want to talk about Kemi Badenoch because she showed up at the CBI conference as the relatively newly installed Tory leader. I think the takeaway from that is she seemed to me to be a lot more confident, but she's an opposition, and it's easy being an opposition. She sort of said, "Well, look, I'm not even at the point of making policy at this point. We are going to have a long discussion in the Tory party about principles and where we go from here, but I'm not going to be drawn on policy." Because we just haven't got any at the moment. She said, "We've got to go away and reflect on the dismal performance that we had, the fact that we let business down pretty badly in the last government, and we've got some work to do." So that's all happened, and then overnight, as Richard says, Louise Haigh has resigned. So that's the first cabinet resignation. There are questions about Rachel Reeves' the embellishments on her CV, and there's been this long-running question about freebies and suits and Arsenal tickets and all the rest of it. So there's also this sort of sense around the government that having been very very strong on ethics and going after the Tories for misleading the public, for Partygate, for low-level corruption, you're sort of seeing that your average man or woman down the pub sort of thinking, well, are Labour that much different? I think that's quite a difficult perception that the party's really got to get control and the government's got to get control of. So where does that leave the polls? Well, it is feeding through. As I said, Labour, thin support at the election, barely over 34% vote share. That's now dropped to 29%, below the magic 30% mark. And the Conservatives have climbed a little bit from 24 points at the election to 26 now. And Reform have picked up 4 points. So they've gone from 14 to 18%. So the sort of spread between the Tories and Labour has narrowed. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the Tories outpoll Labour at some point in the next 6 to 12 months or so. Not because the Tories have got anything particular to say, but because it's an expression of dissatisfaction with Labour. So I think, Starmer's got a job to do. He's got a job to do. And I will leave it at that, Richard.
Okay. Nothing about America then on this occasion, but are we going to wait
Well,
for
I think, look,
are we going to wait for Trump? Because next time we talk, it'll be in 29th of Jan, or 31st of Jan.
Yeah,
so it'll be
we've got
all
his picks.
over.
We've got his picks, haven't we, Richard? So we know who he's putting into cabinet positions. I think the key point about Trump is, and I think we could see this at the last retuning, is that the picks that he's making are all pretty hardline on the trade agenda. Tariffs are coming against Mexico, Canada, and China, he says. And I think there's a question about what happens to European countries as well. That's going to be quite bumpy.
Okay, thanks very much. That was, as always, brilliant insight. So what I might now do now is introduce our guest survey, which has been completed by Performance Leader, and I'll hand you over to Ray de Cruz, who is the CEO performance leader, who's going to be talking us through the results. Over to you, Ray.
Thank you, Richard. And hello to everyone who's joined the call. Delighted to share with you a sneak preview, some highlights, and just highlights because of the time constraints today. There might be an opportunity down the track to do something a bit more detailed. This research project on performance management and feedback in the professions is one that we've been looking forward to doing for some time. The previous 2 or 3 surveys that we've done with MPF's help have related to equity partner performance and compensation. This one focuses on employees, both client-facing and business services. And it harks back to a 2015 survey that we did, again with MPF's help, in the aftermath of the HBR article on rethinking performance management. And so there's some broader context around this survey, and we're in a position to compare some results between now and 9 years ago to see how firms have evolved their performance management practices in that time. I am going to share some slides shortly. Hopefully you can see those. Yep, great. And I'll move through these fairly briefly. I won't stop on every slide, but because it is statistically driven insights, it does help. The research subjects we looked at in relation to performance and feedback were issues such as the frequency of formal reviews and check-ins, the use of ratings and metrics, the effectiveness of the process, links between performance and talent decisions, compensation, bonus, promotion, the use of project or matter-based feedback for individuals and teams. A couple of issues that we're able to bring into this survey around hybrid working and its impact on performance culture, feedback culture, the use of technology and AI in performance management, and finally, priorities for evolving performance management in firms. The survey drew 170 firm respondents, which is an excellent result for something this niche. And as you can see here, strong representation from legal and accounting, and with thanks to MPF, very strong representation from UK firms as well. A good mix of firm size as well. So a few of the insights then. Almost 80% of firms still use annual or 6-monthly reviews. In 2015, when we did this research, there was a real appetite for change. And this figure, though it seems very consistent, if you look at the frequency between 2015, the blue lines, and the frequency between 2024, the green line, highly consistent. Yet that belies the amount of experimentation that firms have undertaken in this area. There is still, as you can see from the yellow line, a desire for more frequent feedback. But when we look at informal feedback, that is check-ins, as we call them, we see that the desire in 2015 for more frequent feedback has actually been realised through informal feedback, not formal feedback. And so almost 2/3 of employees are receiving quarterly or more frequent check-ins with their manager. So when we step back and look at formal and informal feedback together, what we see is that 2015 objective of more frequent feedback conversations is being realised. And I think a lot of your HR teams have put a lot of hard work into this over the last 5 or 10 years, both in terms of people development, systems and processes, and that should be recognised. So overall, I think firms are tracking well, but clearly have a desire for even more frequent feedback as well. One area that we're very interested in is the idea of post-matter or post-project feedback. Interestingly, this still hasn't caught hold in the way that we think it probably should. We're often looking for natural feedback cadences for firms in order to make it easy for people to give and receive feedback. Just 40% of employees receive feedback routinely on significant matters. And we put that word significant into this survey because we did want to add some qualification. We know it's not realistic to have feedback on every project or matter. Accountants lead the way, largely driven by audit teams in this regard. Law firms and other professional firms lag a little bit behind. Somewhat concerningly, only 30% of business services employees receive this type of feedback, rarely or never. This feels like a bit of a vulnerability given the absence of traditional financial and production metrics that apply to these roles. And so we would identify this as a real opportunity for firms to improve, both for client-facing and business services employees. We also asked about the impact of hybrid work on performance and feedback culture. Somewhat surprisingly, most firms said that it hadn't impacted feedback. We do know from a follow-up question that firms have sought to replace or substitute spontaneous or casual interactions with a number of initiatives, more intentional feedback, scheduling anchor days for people in the office and teams, and using technology. So there's been some strategizing around this, but it is worth noting also that 1/3 of our respondents said that hybrid working has negatively impacted feedback, and that is a concern. In terms of technology, we asked a specific question around AI and whether the firm has plans to use AI in the performance management process. 92% of firms are interested in this, either there or moving in that direction. This is largely led by mid to large firms. Unsurprisingly, I think, firms are seeing AI as an opportunity to increase efficiency in the process. But our observation from our own work in this area is that efficiency shouldn't dominate, that quality of conversations, frequency of conversations should remain the North Star in any deployment of AI. Unsurprisingly, since we conducted the research in 2015, we've seen an uptick in adoption of technology for performance and feedback processes. Many of your firms will be using technology. In 2015, 40% of firms used technology for performance reviews. That's up to 72%. And really that's much closer to, it's well into the 90s if we take firms over a certain size, as you can see from the chart. There's a real correlation between firm size and the adoption of technology, and that won't be a surprise, given the natural pain points that exist within that process for a lot of firms. I appreciate that I'm flying through these. I'm hoping that one or two of these might trigger a little bit of interest, but almost there. Technology is largely being used for the benefit of end users, that is partners, managers and employees, as we can see here, for managing reviews, for goal setting, for 360 feedback. Where we see an opportunity is for firms to use that technology to generate more data-based performance insights. So you can see there in the red, analytics to analyze performance trends, and data inputs for REMCOMs and evaluation committees is pretty low, really, given the demographics of the firms that have responded to this survey. Finally, most firms say in an overall sense that this process is effective. I mean, you'd hope so, given the amount of time and effort that people put into it. It is a concern that 15% of firms say that it is ineffective or highly ineffective, although we note that small firms are overrepresented here. And there are some, I guess there are just some administrative challenges in small firms around this stuff. Mid-sized and larger firms tend to have bigger HR teams, specialists in the area. who do a lot of the heavy lifting and end up having a very positive impact. I'll stop sharing my screens and just reflect on the top 5 change priorities for firms. Continuing to increase the frequency of feedback is one. Investing in manager training and development, understanding that this is essentially still a human system at work despite technology. Driving consistency across the firm, particularly in relation to perceptions of fairness. That's very important. These processes can help or hinder those perceptions in a major way. Fourthly, enhancing the feedback culture and in particular creating more psychological safety around feedback. And that might be one of the factors that's impacting those post-matter or project debriefs or feedback. And finally, the continuing integration of technology and adoption of AI to create both efficiency and greater quality in the conversations. And so with that very quick tour, I'll stop there.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Ray. That was really quick canter through, but there's some really good points that emerged from it. So we'd now like to move to the panel session and bring Magnus in. And as I mentioned earlier, Magnus is a managing partner of a 200 size, so in the sort of smaller category, amongst the areas that Ray was showing. And it'd be very interesting, Magnus, if I could just bring you and talk a little bit about this trade-off, if you like, between efficiency and humanity. I know that's not quite that simple, but what are your thoughts on that as the leader of your firm? Over to you. You're mute.
Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. Now you can hear me as well. Great to be on the show. Yes, good questions. I saw Ray's slides a bit earlier and was reflecting on that. I mean, you want to create an efficient system to handle all these performance reviews and things like that in the firm. That's clearly. I mean, we are trying to do it as well to have a HR system that runs this and feedback and everything, bring it all together to support these conversations. But I think it's very important that you don't miss sort of the main thing, which is this is all about people and that people want to be, I mean, they want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be valued and recognized, and that's really a key thing as well as part of driving the performance. So and that's when you thinking about bringing AI and things into this, you must not lose the main sort of purpose on this, because it's a bit risky. But I mean, we are thinking about it too, but I think it's more to sort of just get the background and material to get that into these processes rather than sort of having the AI to. But I mean, it's the personal interaction you have to. That's really key, and I think that's also about the sort of the more, to say, the sort of frequency of more of the regular feedback. I think that's about just meeting with people and being given feedback regularly when it happens, and not just once a year. I think that's. So I think the efficiency is important. You can save a lot of time. This is a time-consuming process, but never forget that it's people we are dealing with, and they want to be seen. Yeah.
I'll just quickly continue, if that may. And Chris, I'll just perhaps ask you a quick question as well, which is because your firm is a little bit larger, obviously, the EIP, in terms of this balance of consistency, humanity, and maybe possibly wearing your day job slightly, the impact that it has if management doesn't get that mix right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incredibly important. We do regular surveys of our people, and actually part of this is interesting to see the fact that accountants and lawyers, there's a bit of discrepancy, if you like, between in terms of sort of project feedback culture. And one of the ways in which we sort of change mindset, if you like, is to get these surveys out and get feedback directly from our people in terms of asking these sort of questions in terms of frequency, whether or not it's quality, whether the feedback is taken into account. And undoubtedly that helps to change the mindset and shift the mindset of people within various departments, particularly if there is a discrepancy between departments, because nobody wants to be at the bottom end of the departmental ranking in terms of this stuff. But I do think I would like to stress, I think it's not just about the time that you do the feedback, it's the quality of the people actually getting hold of that feedback, making sure that it's a quality discussion, that there's that we're really sort of being attentive in terms of that feedback, and then obviously sort of acting on it. And also vice versa, making sure that we give appropriate time for our people in order to deal with that. And if you get it wrong, and there are sort of grievances in my employment law hat, it not only can it sort of create a poor culture, which can tip into being a toxic culture, and if you get into that sort of territory, then you can stand by for for an increased frequency of claims, no doubt about that.
Brilliant. Well, I'll leave you going, Chris, because again, if you have a question to, well, any of the panelists, could it be Magnus or John or Ray?
I was going to
please go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask Magnus about that point about why accountants seem to be better at this than lawyers in terms of sort of post-matter feedback, and I just wondered whether you had a thought yourself on that.
Yeah, I think that has to do a bit with the structure of the cases and the work. I mean, yeah, EIP. I mean, we are a mixed firm. We actually have patent attorneys and solicitors. I mean, so. And I guess the solicitor are mainly involved in litigation. So very big projects, and perhaps they have a clear start and a clear end. So that's perhaps easier to do kind of post project feedback. But whereas the patent attorneys, it's an ongoing work for a client. It's a sort of an ongoing forever more or less. And then a smaller project. So I think it's the nature of the cases and the work that's not sort of not there. Whereas I think accounting, there is a clear start and an end, and I think also, like, if you go to management consulting, they are very good at sort of project based, and I think it's very natural to bring into the processes to have feedback at the end of those. Whereas in our reality, it's an ongoing thing all the time. So I think you need to bring it into more the culture, that you make sure that people are just give a lot of feedback and praise, and also more constructive feedback regularly, and sometimes it's hard to formalize all this, so it needs to be, you have the yearly ones, and then you have to, you can have check-ins, but then you can sort of make it more a part of the culture.
Ray, perhaps I can come back to you for a minute. When we were talking about the same issue, you made the point, I think, that when you have a project-based culture, people delivering client services around specific projects, then this after project feedback is relatively more common. But when it comes to business services, people who are pretty critical to running the firm, that's less common. What's your experience, both with from the survey, but also from your clients, as to how people are approaching the business services post-matter feedback when they don't possibly have matters in the same way that the front-line people do?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And as you saw, the figures are quite low for business services. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think, given, as I said, the absence of some of the more traditional client-facing metrics for business services, there is that gap that needs to be filled, and this would be a very good way to do it. I can only come to the conclusion that it's a leadership issue, that it's really around setting the tone around these project reviews, the psychological safety that needs to go with that, for people to be really honest. But it does tie so heavily into the strategic agenda that so many firms have around innovation and collaboration. All of the leading authors around these issues, like Michelle De Stefano, Heidi Gardner, even pricing, Ron Baker, they all talk about the importance of the post-matter or post-project debrief in terms of driving all of those strategic agendas. So as a missing piece of the puzzle, we think this is probably the big one, but we also recognize that, it's not a simple thing. It's a cultural shift, and therefore it has to be a leadership priority. But I think about it from the perspective of a client. As a client, wouldn't you like to think that your professional services firm is consistently reviewing its performance on projects or matters in the same way that a sporting team would consistently review its performance at the end of every game? I feel like it's a no-brainer, and I'm still a bit stumped why 10 years on those figures still haven't got a bit higher.
Perhaps bring John in, and then I'll leave it to Chris to ask another question. John, from your experience wearing your leadership hat, to what extent in your own sector, I'm not quite sure, marketing, I think it's a bit broader than that, consultancy, to what extent do you find these issues are of importance to the people who work for you?
They are of crucial importance, and I think the expectations of our teams have changed as well. So I think there's it's a bit of a theme I talk about, the sort of generational effects, but a lot of my team are young, they're under 30, and their expectations of feedback are much higher than mine were when I was probably at the same point in my career. So that there is this sense that not only is there the formal performance review process, but the need for ongoing feedback in an informal basis is always there. And if you don't give it, it can cause problems quite quickly. So I think if you were being unkind, you might say that there's a sort of the criticism of Zoomers for being not very resilient. I don't think that's actually fair. I think it's just from their sense, it's an important part of their development to get constant feedback. And I think there's an interesting question about projects as well. So my work is a mixture of retained and project based. And funnily enough, I think we spend more time getting feedback from retained clients than we do on projects, because I think sometimes in projects you sort of think, well, that's done. It's done and dusted now. I've invoiced it. I'm moving on to the next thing. But I think that is a good challenge to do that sort of post project debrief and look at how it's gone well and where you can improve.
John, maybe I could just switch tack slightly in terms of AI, and I was interested to note that still 8% of businesses are not interested in AI, given the clamour that we've had and the profile that it's had. I mean, maybe, I don't know, Ray, that may be made up of primarily smaller businesses, but where do you think we are currently? What's your assessment in terms of businesses, given that you operate in a wide range of sectors, where firms are with this, with AI? And, we hear about the impact. Have you got any greater sense of when that we're really going to see the really significant impact of AI hitting business across the board?
Is that a question to?
That's to you, John. Sorry.
To me.
Yeah.
I think we're all grappling with it, aren't we? I think conceptually we can see how it's valuable, but how we apply it is still a massive challenge. And I don't think we've got the toolkit at the moment. We've got the tools, the toolkit to apply AI to lots of things that we do. And I would say that HR at this point is probably one of them. And I don't know, Ray, if there are any tools that you've seen out there, because I'd be interested to know about them.
Yeah, there are. And I think we're seeing firms adapt and adopt these tools in their performance and feedback processes. There's one example of a large firm that we work with that is taking feedback from multiple sources within the firm multiple people, and using AI to crunch that into a summary.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, it's seeking to save time. It is very conscious, though. It's still being delivered by humans. It's still editable by humans, but they're very conscious of trying to save time. What they've done is write a really quite extensive prompt, and this prompt is a page long. It covers how the summary is to structure the language and the feedback. It addresses potential bias issues. It's a really thoughtful approach where they've really sat back and thought about their values as an organization and how they want this machine to help, rather than just be a black box that they don't really understand. And so that idea of being really careful and thoughtful in its application, I think is a great start. But they're inherently curious, this firm, and so it's they're in a good position to do that. But their North Star is still, as you've already said, Magnus, around the human interaction and the quality of the conversation, and they're just trying to marshal the AI around that.
Excellent. Magnus, just coming back to perhaps your tech hat for a minute, because I appreciate that's one of the things that Pat is looking into a lot. I mean, are you seeing use of technology in this arena?
I mean, I think as I see in our field, we see use of AI, I think, in three fields. I mean, one is the sort of the delivery of the services where there is a lot going on for drafting of help or supporting with drafting of patents and things like that. That's a lot of, we are developing things ourselves as well. And then you of course have the more regular to support your business services. And I think a lot of the firms are trying this. They have different pilots and things like that, and so are we. I think that's sort of what you hear, but I think it takes a bit longer before it's really starting to become embedded in firms. I think they're still at very much a trial stage at the moment, and maybe I know the bigger firms have come a longer way, but I think in a year or so I think it will be more into a lot of firms, I think.
Right. Well, we've switched to gallery mode now because fortunately we're at the last minute. So what I'd like to do is invite our four guests today, just to give me one topic that's emerged today, or a thought that either reinforced something they knew already, or was, oh, that's really interesting. Starting with you, John, if I may.
Yeah, I think I'm going to alight on the post-project feedback thing. I think that's something we should do. We should do more of. And that's something I will take away and talk to my team about.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Nice to be able to put something on someone's agenda with that. Chris, what's your takeaway for today?
Well, it's sort of more of a comment really, because it's we do use HR analytics for our survey, our people firm wide, and an AI tool in that context, and it is fantastically efficient in terms of getting analytics and getting feedback very quickly to the business and the leaders. So I would definitely recommend that to people that are listening.
Magnus, what's your takeaway today?
I think, as John, I think this post-project feedback, how do we, I mean, we do it a bit with clients and together with clients and things like that, but I think to get it in more regularly in the practice, even though we don't have sort of projects in the same way as some other consultancies, but I think that's important. Yeah.
Well, Ray, looks like you've got two converts to your crusade now. So what's your final thought for today?
It's picking up on what Magnus said earlier, that these are essentially human dynamics, and leadership is really the critical factor. I come from a technology background, but it's just impossible to overlook the central role of leaders in setting the tone.
Well, thank you, everybody. We are by now Christmas break, if you like. So we will be back at the end of January, 31st of January, episode 100 of Retuning Your Firm, which was when I started it up in 2020, I thought I might get to 10, but I don't think anybody suspected we'd get to 100. So that's exciting. And I will be joined on that occasion, not just by John, hopefully, but also by Francesca Lagerberg. And those of you who've been on this journey with me will know that she was involved in pretty much all the first 50 or 60 episodes, then got a lovely job working for Baker Tilly International as global CEO, lives on a plane, so has unfortunately not been able to join us as much as she'd hoped, but she's really looking forward to coming back to the audience, and we will be sending you the registration through Zoom because we do that once a year. I'll give you a chance to refresh the people who are on there. But I'd like to, apart from saying we're going to have a lovely time in January, really like to thank our panelists today. I'd like to thank Ray for giving us a sneak preview of the survey. I thought it was really interesting, and lots of discussion will come from that. Maybe another HBR article, who knows? I would like to thank Chris for his excellent questions and for giving us that really good insight as to how if you like, it's not just management doing the right thing, but if they do the wrong thing and that leads to toxic culture, then that can have, well, it'll keep lawyers busy, put it that way. And I'd like to thank Magnus for giving us some insights from a sector we don't normally hear as much from, possibly as we should, which is patent attorneys, but very, very critical, particularly in this modern tech world. And John, thank you as always. Have a wonderful Christmas, and we will catch up with your thoughts about 8 days after Trump sits in office, I think, something like that, maybe 10. But anyway, that sort of thing. So I'm sure that will be top of the list. But the great thing about John's presentation this week, each month, is we never quite know what's going to come next. So there you go. And that's part of the enjoyment of life, I guess. So on behalf of everybody, thank you so much, and look forward. Have a great Christmas break, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing some of you in the new year. Bye for now.
Bye.
Thanks very much.